I'd like to call the work session to order, please. This is Monday, March 24th, close to 5 p.m. Yeah, about a minute after 5. We almost made it. I'm going to announce today, Cheryl Lynn, good to see you here.
Yes, welcome.
Thank you. You're so lovely. So you're looking good. We're happy to see that and to have you back. So we'll go on to, we have 2 items on tonight's work session agenda. Before I go into that, you know we do have a special meeting following this. Now, if we don't take a break in between this work session, we can do it after that and then have the special meeting. So, okay? All right, so let's start out. The council, you're going to receive an update on the city's park and recreation and trails and open space master plan. And just let you know, I spent 4 hours this afternoon reading this, okay? So I am excited. So you've got the floor, Nathan.
Thank you. Mayor, members of the council, it's my pleasure to present be here tonight to present the draft plan for the Parks and Recreation Master Plan. This culminates about a year of activity to get to this point of research, community outreach, and many visits with our Parks and Recreation Commission, who's been involved in this process. I'd like to, if I can, very quickly introduce the members of our Park and Recreation Commission members and have them stand, please. We have our chair, Jen Sylvester.
Just stay standing. We're going to give an applause at the end.
Our
here.
vice chair, John Richardson. We have Nicole Baumgarten. And I believe Brian and Mike Murphy. Mike Padilla is here. And Brian Murphy will be joining us later. But these are the members of our Parks and Recreation Commission. I can tell you they've looked at many of spreadsheets and listened to Leslie talk for quite some time, but they've also been able to offer some input throughout this process. So I want to thank them for their efforts.
Well, before we stay standing, before we go to this, I'm just going to tell you what a terrific job it was and what you've contributed to the city of Goodyear. Unbelievable. So when I went through this, I was extremely pleased. So I'm going to kind of go off order. Council, anybody want to make a mention to these people that are here tonight? Give them a attaboy.
No, I would just add to that, we really appreciate you giving up of your time to help the city in this endeavor. Really, thank you.
So anybody else? You're all set?
Sure.
Joanne?
Well, I was thrilled in reading everything, and I appreciate all the open space and the trails and the parks. You know, this was really something that I think puts teeth to the things that we have to decide upon, and I really appreciate your time. Thanks.
Any other comments? Yes, go on. Sherry?
I want to thank you all for your time, and it's a great plan, and I'm very excited to go through with it and see it come to life in the next, not right away, but next couple of years, because I think this is really going to make our city special. So thank you for all your work.
Bill?
Yeah, I too, it was great to be able to seat most of the commission, and knowing that we would have a great document at the end. I had a great deal of confidence in everybody. So it's wonderful. It helps really lay the foundation for us to move forward and plan. I think that becomes the biggest challenge. Is there's so many needs, and which ones do we move first? This really helps lay that out for us. So thanks for giving up as much time as I know that you did.
Wally?
Well, I just wanted to thank you also. Little did you know when you signed on to be on our commission that you were going to be brought into the fold to automatically do a master plan. But the master plan is so important to any city, and this will last for many, many years. And in essence, this is kind of your legacy as well. And we want to thank you for all the input, and I know all of you got so many of our residents involved, and we appreciate that. And we just thank you very much, and we look forward to working through the plan, and hopefully some of these wonderful projects will really come to fruition in years to come. Thank you.
Sherilyn?
I know thank you isn't a lot, and I know it's been said 6 other times, but the truth of the matter is it just once more demonstrates what an amazing group of people that live in the city of Goodyear. I've said that for years and years, and you once more have affirmed my statements that people are willing to help and will help and provide their expertise. So thanks.
The reason I did this beforehand, because when you get in a work, we're still going to clap for you, so don't go anywhere. When you get in a work session, you start talking about this and that, and there may be some saying, well, I don't know, sure, I agree with that, and I know this. So I don't want you to think that's taking away from all the good work that you all did. So we're going to give you a round of applause, and we're looking forward to digging in tonight.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, Nathan, you have the floor now.
Let's dig right in, Mayor. For a second, I'd just like to have Mayor and Council just picture the perfect good year and what you picture as the perfect good year. It's a city that is thriving in its economic development pursuits, a city that is clean, safe, and attractive, a city that is diverse, healthy, and active in its community. It's a city where residents have opportunities to interact while gaining a sense of community and belonging. No doubt, when you think the perfect good year, you think Parks and Recreation at the core. You see, Parks and Recreation is also, quality Parks and Recreation can be an economic development tool. It not only helps you retain your current businesses and residents, but it also is a tool to help attract new residents and new businesses. Parks add a beautiful landscape and provide a community identity. Quality Parks and Recreation promotes healthy lifestyles, whether it's through individually exercising in our park system, walking on the
It's back in.
trails,
So it's on right now.
or
I'm gonna turn it
participating
off.
in organized programs, or the farmers market. Parks and Recreation builds community. 60% of those that are participating in our programs indicate that they are making lifelong friendships in our programs. And so we are building community through our Parks and Recreation. So when you think perfect good year, Parks and Recreation has to be at the core of that vision. The objective for today is to prevent the outcome and findings and key recommendations for the draft Parks Master Plan and to receive council feedback. We have a full agenda, so we'll be moving through fairly quickly, but we have allotted time for discussion after each of the major areas. So we will introduce Planet's team. We will discuss some of the existing conditions and challenges associated with our current system. You'll hear about the community outreach efforts and what we learned from those efforts. And then, of course, the key recommendations and funding opportunities for such recommendations. I'd like to start off by introducing our team of experts. Leslie Dornfield is the principal for Planet. She has more than 25 years of planning experience, and you may recognize her because she's also the consultant for the general plan. And I think we had strong connection and coordination with the general plan and the Parks and Recreation Master Plan. The next member is Ken Ballard. Ken brings more than 30 years of recreation and Parks and Recreation experience. He's consulted on more than 300 projects across the country. The unique thing about Ken is there were 6 firms that we actually interviewed for this consulting job, and Ken was part of 5 out of 6 teams. And so he was a stable person, whichever way you went. That speaks a little bit to Ken's credibility. We also have Jim Kaufman, our trails expert, more than 26 years in the planning field. And then, of course, Rick Merritt, principal for Elliott D. Pollock, looking at our funding opportunities. So we feel like we have a very strong team to work with, and we're anxious to present the plan. So I'm going to turn things over to Leslie.
Hi, and just before we start, on behalf of the team, I just want to say that it's really, it's great to work with Goodyear. All of us love this city, and we love the staff, not only in Parks and Rec, but in all the departments that we work with, finance, planning, management team, in the development of this plan, and it's really, it's great. And your participation is really what's made, I hope, this document something that you're comfortable with. And then lastly, the Parks and Rec Commission, Nathan wasn't kidding, they went through every spreadsheet and every page, and they were intimately involved. So hopefully we did them proud and reflected their input as well. I just want to talk a little bit about some of the other ways that this plan was coordinated with some of the ongoing planning efforts that the city has, and also some of their guiding documents. Probably the biggest one would be the strategic plan. There are these 4 key strategic goals, the pillars of the plan. And what's interesting is when we were preparing a little bit for tonight, some of the things that we heard was, Goodyear, if it really wants to be this, it needs to make a choice about the kind of place it wants to be, and this plan can help them do it. One of the staff said that the plan is really something that is really very forward-thinking, and it is. I can tell you from what I've seen and what other communities are willing to do, you're really stepping out. It is something that really does support the economy of the city. You know from the ballpark how important Parks and Rec are to the economy, but also things like tournaments and leagues and all of these things that make a place a Goodyear a good place to stay, but a good place to visit as well. As we developed the plan, we were very closely coordinated with the general plan. We presented to the general plan committee. They were very clear about the kinds of parks that they envisioned within each of the types of land use categories. We connected that in the plan. We also met several times with the transportation plan consultant, and we very carefully made sure that trails and crossings and mid-block crossings were addressed and they didn't fall through the gaps between those 2 plans. So what I'm going to do tonight is talk a little bit about the existing conditions, and you're going to hear a little bit from all of us within this presentation. And as Nathan said, at the end of, I think at the end of each section, feel free to ask questions, but again, it's your pleasure, so if you want to ask after each of us, I think, will that be all right? Just have them ask as we go through? Sure. Okay.
Your team's comfortable with that?
However you want to do it, we're good.
So,
However you want to do it.
As we go.
as you go.
Is that what you would prefer?
Yes.
Okay, we're good with it. I have this slide up here just to kind of set the stage. You're going to double in the next 16 years, which means if you don't do another thing, if you just keep doing what you're doing, that means you have to double the number of facilities you have today to keep your current level of service. And that's a big number just out of the gate. So we're working within a framework of no matter what you do, you're going to be catching up. No, sorry, I'll do that. I'm sorry, Nathan. This is just an idea of what you would have to double. It is your existing inventory. You've got 18 parks now. They consist of 266 acres. 11 of those parks are neighborhood parks, and those total 65 acres. And that's the bulk of your parks. So the reason I say that is most of your parks are smaller, which means they don't provide room for a lot of facilities that we'll be talking about later, things like fields, tournament fields, and configurations of facilities that a lot of people need for active parks and recreation. They also don't provide room for a lot of the more unique kinds of facilities that people in your community are also asking for. You have 3 community parks. Their average size is 26 acres, and there's a total of 90 of those acres. And then you also have special use parks. You've got the ballpark, Goodyear Ballpark. You've got a BMX park, which you lease the land to, or you share the land with a private entity. You've got Roscoe Dog Park. Those are all very neat and cool facilities that your community loves. When we look at the city, you are right in the average. You're right in the average number of park acres per resident. But again, to tie that back to the other slide, remember that while overall you might provide the average number of acres, you are short in the larger citywide types of parks. And something to point out is that most jurisdictions have several large parks, and that's where they have what I would call these aggregate sets of facilities. And that's an ongoing concern that we face as we move forward. So you've been doing good in getting parkland, it's just how it's configured is one of the top things that we're looking at. And the way we did this benchmark survey, just so that you know, when we benchmark against these other jurisdictions, you'll see on the slide, we basically looked at the websites of each of those jurisdictions and then sent them a survey, and they self-reported the number of acres and facilities that they had. So some of you may read somewhere else about another number of facilities. Everybody counts differently. This is based on everybody's 2012 population and the self-reported facilities by those jurisdictions that we had, more or less verified by their websites. And then we compared you across based on facilities per 10,000. You'll see the ball fields per 10,000. It says no ballpark, which means what we did with your ballpark fields is we took out the fields that are not available for public use. And then the fields that were available for public use, we prorated for the months that they were taken out of use. The other thing that I would point out is although that does add, I think, 6 fields to your inventory, it's almost, we added the full 6 fields, but it's kind of a half add because those fields don't meet the need of the whole community. They only meet needs for older teams. I think it's like 14 and above can use that field. So a lot of the younger players aren't able to access those fields and so are affected by an even less of an inventory of fields to play with.
Can I interrupt there? They're not there practicing, it's tournaments they're there for, is that? Or did they actually use those fields, the older?
Correct. We do utilize, the community utilizes the fields for Little League and play, but the fields themselves aren't designed for younger age groups, so they couldn't facilitate, the teams like to play there, get there once or twice in the ballpark.
But they don't
per season,
drill
but
out
they
there,
can't play there
they
the whole
don't practice
season.
out there, so that they actually play their tournament, or their league games on those fields.
Correct. The
Okay.
Little League, the older Little League teams, the 13 and above, the juniors, they do practice and
They
play
do, on
out
those-
there.
on those courts.
Because they're age appropriate for them. So they have their entire season there. But the younger kids play a game or two just to get the experience playing on the big fields, but they're not designed necessarily for a full league at that size.
Thank you.
The other big thing that you're short on is soccer fields, or what we call square fields, multi-use fields now. And again, if you look at that chart, you can just see comparatively, Goodyear is low. And again, part of that has to do with the size of the parks that you have and the configuration of the parks. When we look at the parks themselves, there are also some things that we've learned. While, again, you have a fair number of parks, what I'm going to do is go to, where's the mouse? Here it is. I'm losing it. Yeah, because I can't find it. There's a couple of things that came up. One is that a lot of your parks have been dedicated to the city by developers. Some of those parks the city doesn't have a book that says if you're going to dedicate a park, this is the standard you need to meet. These are the warranty standards, these are the equipment minimums that we'll accept. And as a result, and I know that you saw this in your last budget year, your maintenance and replacement costs are probably a little higher than they should be because you don't have the standard level. A second thing is,
I just can interrupt you. So I was surprised when I read that there are parks that are inefficient because the mechanics of them are breaking down, and the water in all the different sections. And it surprised me that we didn't have standards like we do for the home industry. We bring an inspector in, and there are no inspectors that go into parks at all.
It's my understanding that they're reviewed per general construction guidelines, but in terms of what amenities and how the parks are built, that, the quality and what types of amenities are going into the parks, those are the standards that are lacking now. And this plan addresses those needs.
Bill?
Nathan, I assume that is a product of our design guidelines? Is that? Or
no, it's not. It's not.
No.
Well, how does one correct that?
why is it not?
you know?
Let me ask it that way then.
Actually, a lot of jurisdictions require parks to be provided, and those are part of your design guidelines. But
Right.
amenities within parks, and some of them might even say a minimum of so many acres, but the specific amenities within parks, I don't think, probably until we saw the outcome of those policies, communities realized they needed to do more. So I suspect that's why you don't have it. I think
Okay.
it was a learning curve situation. And it's not unusual, Ken's right, it's absolutely not unusual at all.
And I'll absolutely agree with all that I think we're seeing now the product of
Yeah.
what we've, previously done. But going forward, next week, we're having a discussion on changing our design guidelines. And so I'm going to ask the manager, is this the appropriate time is that where you want to insert this discussion, is in there, that we can make sure we get this nailed down?
Waiting for the mic to kick on. Yes, Mayor, Councilmember Stipp, that's exactly a good time to bring that up as we go through the update on the design guidelines, because that is policy direction, and that's where we can affect the change.
Okay, so if I can request that we make sure that hits that agenda or lists, I think that might help us moving forward. Because I think your last slide was Portales Park, which, if you look at it from a, I have no idea how big the widest part of it is, but it still doesn't look big enough to really do anything
Yeah,
at.
we could go on for I could go on for quite some time with Portales. The issue with Portales, and it's a great example, Mayor, Councilmember Stipp, if you don't mind, the only high and dry part of Portales is the north end.
It is.
And that park has no parking.
Right.
And so if you were to provide parking, you have to provide that in high and dry. That would use up all the high and dry area. The southern part is very difficult for fields. You can't really fit them in properly, and you can't really access them well. So if you have now all your bats and your balls, and you've got a baseball field at the southern end, you've got to park on the high end and drag everything down, with your cooler and your kids to the southern end. So configuration-wise, it's a difficult situation. The design guidelines would not necessarily prevent that from occurring, but it requires a certain number of fields and facilities in each park, and it also, the plan suggests that there's park department review when those come through the process, so that those kinds of configuration issues wouldn't occur, and access issues might get addressed through that process.
Great, that's what I was driving
Joanne?
at. Thanks.
Following those lines, so when new developments come in and we have streets, for example, I believe we go through I could be wrong, but a 2-year warranty period before we accept them as city streets or something in that line. Are you saying that parks, we don't do that same type of thing with kind of a warranty period of that, you want to dedicate this park to the city now, let's go in and, look at everything before we accept it and make you bring it to par before
There's
we...
been a combination of both, and where those opportunities have existed for that has occurred. But, some of the quality that was involved with some of the builds is now problematic for us. So
I guess
whether it's
my
light
question was
poles or-
quality.
Right,
And
right.
how do you require, that is, it doesn't have to be, I'm sure we have to have a medium price range for them, but how do you prevent that? I mean, do we have the ability to do that?
Right.
Yeah, and I think
But
we could
setting the
research how best
standards,
to,
right.
how best to
Okay.
do that. The standards
Right.
in the parks plan won't get to the quality standards, but it does speak to the types of amenities that should go into those parks and how they should be designed.
Wally?
Well, I'm not sure that we know what we want in those parks from the developers unless we tell them we want it turnkey, and we specifically tell them what we want in there and what the acreage is and what the irrigation system is and what the playground system is. My prior service on a park board, we had in place that every park turned over to our city was turnkey, and the city was not to spend any money on anything, and it was to be able to provide for that community wherever it was being built. So I was surprised we don't do that here, but I can understand because land sometimes is at a premium and developers aren't always going to put in the amenities that we think they should if there's no guideline for them. So I would just encourage you to look into whatever you need to do, so there's no reason why we can't say it has to be turnkey.
Sure.
Because what they don't do in order for our residents to use it, we're going to have to do and put money in that we don't necessarily have for that parcel of land.
Agreed.
Joe?
I just want to make sure I understand this correctly. In the design guidelines, and I'll just piggyback on what Steve was mentioned, are we also looking at ability to address functionality? So down the road, you're not coming back and tearing something up because you've got, you don't have the parking in the right place, you don't have the field in the right place. Not just the actual equipment that goes in there, but is it functional? I mean, is it laid out in a way that it's designed to operate?
Sure, correct. We have Leslie address that.
Mayor, Councilman Pizzillo, thank you for that question. Yes, we are, and the plan includes standards about what facilities should go in a park. One of the requirements that we have in the plan is parks should be provided, every basically within a quarter mile of every residence, and they need to be high and dry. So that in and of itself is a big step forward. As the parks go through the design process, we also recommend there's a park staff person approving those development plans, so they would then begin to work with the developer to address the functionality. We also include in the plan what I call sample site plans to demonstrate how parks could work, the relationships of restrooms to fields and parking to fields and things like that.
Thank you.
Sherry?
Yeah, one of the things I've noticed about some of our parks is, and you just mentioned it, they don't have facilities, they don't have restrooms, and if you're going to be out there playing soccer games, and I've gotten the feeling that we've let some of the developers basically use green space interchangeable with a park, and I think from what you're saying is, under the plan, it wouldn't be the same as a retention area with grass, and it is not necessarily a park.
Yeah, can I?
Oh, knock yourself out.
No, basically, the current, there were no park standards for open space requirements for development. Private development, as it sits now, is required to provide so much area for open space. What the plan does is say that you have to now provide 5 acres high and dry as part of a park, in addition to your drainage, retention, open space. So that's a shift there, but it's a positive shift.
Joanne?
And that's actually was hitting upon, because I remember from planning and zoning days all the way through here, is that has become an issue that we kept asking, especially when, a few of you weren't here, but when Wildflower Ranch School's big, huge park was the developer's water retention basin. And so many developers try to say, oh, this open space is, your park, but it's the water retention basin at the same time. And then I thought that there was a standard that we said a percentage of it had to be, and so I don't know if that ever actually came through, or if you really do have big numbers that you're going to present now.
Mayor, Councilwoman Osborne, the way we set the plan up was not to change the open space standards that you're asking for. So we're not asking for developers to provide any more land in open space, but what we are asking them to do is, out of their open space or any other way they want to provide one 5-acre high and dry neighborhood park within a quarter mile of all residences. So if it comes out of their open space requirement, that's fine. If there are additional reasons they might want to have open space, or if they need more land for drainage, which they typically count as their open space, requiring that 5 acres high and dry may bump them above that percentage. But we're not really asking for more open space. We're saying if you can make it work within the open space standards that exist, that's fine. If you want to provide additional land for drainage, that's fine too. But you need to provide your 5 acres high and
But
dry.
I understand there's a new process in building, that they can use those sites, and they can, so the drainage would be underneath, and they fill the top in, and it's usable. I saw a whole series on it in television, and it was just amazing. So it's all underground. Now, I don't know what the cost of that is,
Right.
but it allows them to use that as a green space, so that they still can market every little inch of land. I just don't know what the cost, how cost-effective it is to a developer, but it is possible.
Yes, and that was the objective, was really to minimize the impact to development while raising the quality of the community. So I'm going to go to the next slide. Can we just put that map back up real quickly? I just very quickly want to point out this map. Through the plan, we did identify the need for additional parks, and this slide shows you where the current parks are in green, but also shows you an opportunity to locate 2 additional parks in Central Goodyear. One of the things that we did learn is that in terms of community parks or larger parks that can hold fields and facilities, Central Goodyear is somewhat underserved. So the plan does recommend that.
If you know the number of that map or the page number, and I don't know if
For
you
the
do,
map?
It would help council, because it's hard to see from here. And I know it's in here because I looked at it this afternoon.
It's this one,
no,
the
in
first
the plan.
fold out.
Okay.
It's fold out. And
Yeah,
it
the
would
first
be,
fold out.
hold on, I can just look in the,
It's in between 10 and
But just as you go, if you would do that, it would be most
It's
helpful.
maybe page 13.
Yeah,
Yeah, it is page 13. Thank you.
thank you. So those are the existing, I think in the plan, the Gold Star parks are not in there
No, they're not.
on that map. And just for your information, the reason we did not put that in the plan is we want to give you as much flexibility in locating those parks, but this is just an example of where those could occur. The next thing we're going to talk about is Jim Kaufman is going to take on talking about existing conditions for trails.
So trails, from everything we heard in all of our public meetings, this is really important stuff to Goodyear. So there's a lot of facilities out there already. So there's, within the 61 acres of Bullard Wash Phases 1 and 2, there's many paths and trails already built. So we always talk about trails as being an unpaved facility, which is like that picture of the Falcon Park Trail in the upper right corner. And then there's 32 miles of paved paths, like the one that you see in the lower left. They're also along Roosevelt Canal. They're also just kind of scattered. There's some in Estrella Mountain Ranch and some of the other master plan communities. Currently, they're scattered around, except for some connections that are along the Bullard Wash. So if you click on that map, and that's an overview. I mean, that's really tiny for all of us right here, but on that map, you can see that anything that's a solid line exists, and this is a map that reflects the kind of the path and trail definitions that were in the prior general plan. So it does include a lot of the facilities that were located along streets. So it did include some of the wide sidewalks that you see. A lot of the orange dashed lines on there was my kind of first effort of suggesting where some new facilities might go based on the philosophies that already existed in the prior general plan. So, and it's pages 46
51.
or 51
And 50.
and 51 in the plan. So along utility corridors, along washes, along canals, along the rivers, that's where a lot of that stuff was. So you can see how all that kind of plays out. Yeah. And then I'll just talk briefly about the open space network. Go ahead to the next slide. And as I'm sure you're all well aware, and as we were amazingly impressed when we first started working on this project, the tremendous abundance of open space opportunities that there are in Goodyear, and the amazing resources that surround it or go right through the middle of it. And so this is some of the things that are listed there. The Sonoran Desert National Monument to the south and the southwest, Estrella Mountain Regional Park up kind of right in the middle of Goodyear. The fact that there are two federal wilderness areas practically at the edge of Goodyear, amazing. That really doesn't happen anywhere else in the valley. The future importance of Waterman Wash and the whole southern part of Goodyear, that diagonal blue line that runs through all of that portion of Goodyear and makes a connection to the Gila River. Some tremendous open space opportunities. All in the southern part of the city, the kind of the checkerboard of gold and blue, the combination of BLM land and state trust land. Combine that with some of the wildlife corridors that have been identified, linking Estrella Mountain Wilderness to the wilderness areas in the Sonoran Desert National Monument, and the overflight areas for Luke up in the northwest corner of the city. An amazing potential for an open space network, of which the trail system really supports. They really do go hand in hand. They use each other as a means of connecting the city and all the developed portions of the city.
I just want to say one thing. This open space network that you have is legion. And if you turn Goodyear upside down and look at Scottsdale, you minimize it. Compared to what Scottsdale has, your resources are way beyond and way more connected. You look at Peoria, it's the same kind of a situation. They are just connected to all of these phenomenal county, national, and open spaces. And the trail system, and as you go south, are really a potential to be a signature element of the city. There's a lot of opportunities to tie that to economic development, much as Scottsdale has done. And we really think that's something that as the city grows, and the next plan is probably going to be the main focus. Right now, you're still a little bit north, but we just want to make sure that you don't make decisions that would prevent you from taking full advantage of these amazing, amazing resources.
Oh, I love
So that's
you.
what we pointed out.
I know you're happy tonight, Joanne.
We love you too. Yeah, and just briefly, like so in addition to all these open spaces, these,
Oh, I'm sorry, Sherry?
Oh, I'm
You
sorry.
had another, I'm sorry.
When you said that, it made me think about Scottsdale, and people they drive to hike Camelback Mountain, to hike Piestewa Peak, to hike Thunderbird. What do we need to do to our trail system so they hike Estrella?
Oh my gosh, did you make Jim happy?
yeah.
Wait a minute, before you do that, Bill, is that a question? you-
No, go ahead and do this one.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, go back to the
Go
map,
back to the map.
yes.
Sorry, I can't make this work.
So Mayor and Councilwoman Loretano, yeah, the plan talks about a very interconnected network of both paved paths and unpaved trails so that we can accommodate literally any type of non-motorized user that we could imagine. And then we couple that with appropriately placed trailheads where people who don't have the opportunity to sort of walk out their backyard and get quickly to a trail so they can go to convenient locations to park their car and get on the system. We also talk about the need for access points directly from neighborhoods so that,
You can't see between the monument that they talked about. You can't really see that little arrow. It's impossible.
the little arrows, no, I can't.
Okay, never mind.
So the plan does strategically locate trailheads along the biggest resources. So there's things adjacent to the Estrella Mountain Park, along the Gila River, several locations along the Waterman Wash, or even, amazingly, we talked to the Maricopa County Parks Department, who in the past was kind of like, keep away from us, we want everybody to go through one door and pay a fee. They were not at all like that. They were willing to work with the city of Goodyear to create some additional access points into the park. So those are showing up on the plan as well. And some trailheads that might feed into them potentially, and to feed potentially into the Sonoran Desert National Monument, and an open space system that might be uniquely Goodyear someday too. So all that is in the plan.
And also, Mayor and Councilmember Loretano, the other thing that I would say is, part of this process, we did talk with Scottsdale and see how they built their system. Actually, Katie and I went out. And one of the things that we learned from Scottsdale is, as you know, most of their system was built with Arizona Preserve Initiative funds and also with bond funds. Their recommendation, sales tax supported bond. Their recommendation was to begin to form a citizens committee to begin to educate the community about this resource. And then that committee can then lead a lot of more citizen-led efforts that may ultimately have some kind of a fiscal impact, but they could, for example, form a 501c3. They could go after Heritage Fund grants with support from the city. But they did say to us that, you need citizen support to take on a system this big. You really do need citizen support and staff support of that.
And that's something we can do early on.
Right.
Okay, that takes time to get that, so that's something we could start immediately. Right. Okay. Bill? Thank you.
Leslie, you had mentioned about making sure we take steps not to do anything that impacts the future of these trails. And then you said maybe not this plan, but the next one. Are you talking about this Parks Master Plan, or are you talking about this general plan?
Thank you for that question. I was really talking about this Parks Master Plan. We don't, the emphasis on open space in this plan is more to highlight that it's there and raise awareness of its potential. I think that as development, your general plan's already looked at that through its land use categories, and Katie's done a great job of that. I think that the next plan, because you have to update them, will be at a point where development is at those resources, and I think public awareness of those resources will be much higher.
Is there anything that we need to do now, either through the design guideline updates or the general plan or something? We're going to sit here today, 2014, and 2019, someone's going to have a great idea, and we're going to have forgotten all about this conversation, and I'd like to make sure that we've got an avenue that this is,
Well, how do we bring it into our community development?
yeah,
So
kind of
that-
locked into our
that it's a
processes. That's
record
really what I'm
and that-
driving at.
Mayor, Lord, Councilmember Stipp, that's a great question. In the plan, we've already identified trailheads. If development occurs around a trailhead, we need to make sure that stays a public access trailhead. A little bit later, we'll be talking about the main recommendations, but we have a trails plan that says you need to have publicly accessible trails that are in the plan. So access, it's really maintaining access is maintained. I would say one of the other big things is as the 303 gets constructed, and we talked with the Transportation Master Plan folks about that, making sure that it doesn't cut off access to the Sonoran National Monument. And I think that as the city's worked with ADOT, I think you've already begun to address that as well through an EIS. So I would suggest that what you might want to do is keep an eye on those things to make sure they continue to live up to their expectations.
But are we going to, I think in this, it talks about Parks and Recreation sitting on the committee when new industries come in and when new developments come in, that they're around the table and feeding that information? And I think
Part
that,
of the plan.
okay, so you
Part
want
of
to
the
address
checklist.
that?
That is part of the plan, Mayor.
That's
going
part of
forward.
the plan, okay, all right. Joanne?
Just out of curiosity's sake, in the past, over the years, and I don't know that we'll see any more development of golf courses, but in the past, golf courses have been considered some open space percentage for these developers. Did you guys look at any of that, or was any of that calculated into anything that you put together? Or going forward, do you have any thoughts about, if I can't imagine any more are going to come, but you can't knock on wood that they won't, but how do you feel about that? Because that's been, a point of contention in the past over that.
Mayor, Councilman Osborne, if a developer chooses to provide a golf course as part of their project and wants to use that golf course to meet the ordinance-mandated open space requirement, that's fine. However, they must also provide a 5-acre neighborhood park within a quarter mile of all residences. So our approach to golf courses is to leave them to the market and to require neighborhood parks within a quarter mile of all residences. And so they could provide a golf course, they still have to provide a neighborhood park.
Well, I've just seen where in the golf courses that come within these communities, there's signs posted everywhere that no trespassing,
Right.
or you'll be fined, and this and that. So how do you, I don't consider that open space, since
Right, and it's not counted as open space in the plan if that golf course is over, let's say, for example, a trail alignment in the plan, that trail access, the plan states, would need to remain public. So the public would be able to traverse the golf course on that trail. So, for example, a situation like what we have at Palm Valley would not occur as a result of what's in this plan.
And and with the trail systems, there's no reason why future developments, even if it's a gated community, that you don't say, outside the gates, have a connectivity to some of that. Okay, thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
I have a question.
Yes, Molly?
Did you tie in the Maricopa Trail, the Sun Circle? Because part of that has not been master planned. It stops at Northern. Because I was working with a group and we wanted to master plan, or at least attempt to talk about master planning as a project for a group that I'm in.
Yes, Mayor and Councilman Campbell, yes, it's, the Maricopa Trail runs along the Gila River.
Yes, it does.
It shows very prominently in our
Yeah.
plans, and we talk about it, while it's in Goodyear, that it's a combination of both a paved path and an unpaved trail, and that it makes linkages on either side and connects to the Sun Circle up to the Fria and all of that, so
But it
yes, that's all
stops
in there.
outside of Goodyear, right? Because it doesn't connect. Peoria hasn't done their part.
Yeah, a lot of the linkages are not yet in place, but we're recognizing that Goodyear's an important part of that.
Yeah.
And to the west side of Goodyear, the Maricopa turns north, just outside of Goodyear through
right.
Buckeye and heads north. And obviously, they're responsible for that, but it's clearly identified the Goodyear portions of it.
Good, perfect, thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
beyond just looking at the physical amenities that you have as resources within Goodyear right now, we also took a look at your existing programs and services. And honestly, you have a pretty broad array of recreation program opportunities. And over the course, even in the last year of this study, we've seen that dramatically grow. And it's a real testament to a pretty small recreation division that's really been able to take a limited number of resources and really use those to their full ability. And you've taken a non-traditional approach to that. So you're utilizing a lot of other providers' facilities as locations for recreation programming. So it's really helped to try to grow a baseline of programs across a lot of areas. But, go ahead. Still, what we're finding is due to lack of facilities in general, and again, realizing that you look back at that slide, we're going to be, and again, doubling in population, that's going to manifest itself and make recreation programming growth opportunities much more limited. Right now, you have relatively limited access to school facilities. We're recommending that trying to set up a universal IGA with each of the school districts beyond just the relationships that are there presently with individual schools. It's also a realization that while school facilities are important, they have limited opportunities because they are first and foremost school facilities. So you still are severely limited on what you can do there just by the availability of time and space. And again, realizing that your population is going to grow, a lot of it right now, the issue is uneven access by most of your facilities, whether they're parks or other amenities, being kind of more obviously in the northern portion of the city. So that makes it tough providing programming and other activities further down in the central part of Goodyear and even farther south than that. Even it's not just an indoor issue, it's outdoor side of it as well. Limited numbers of fields in just a few locations that make it difficult to provide tournaments, and we heard that time and time again from all the different sports groups and organizations. And I'll turn it back to Leslie, and she'll talk more about some of that public input down the road.
And what Ken says is important.
Jerry, excuse me.
Sorry to keep jumping in here. When you talk about some of the facilities and the IGAs with the school, I know we had a relationship with the Y, and I know they changed directors, and I sit on that committee, but they keep changing the meetings around. But is that something we're going to look at, or can we get an update and see how that is helping our residents with that aquatics pool, or if there's something we can change to make that more beneficial as we go through this?
Go ahead.
Actually, that's one of our recommendations in this plan, is that you revisit your relationship and the long-term agreement with the YMCA. Yes, we think it's valuable. We think it probably needs to be adjusted slightly to be a little more favorable, quite honestly, to the city than what it is right now. But I think keeping your relationships with other providers is going to be essential. That's the only way you're going to be able to provide the breadth of services that are going to be needed in this community for the next 30 or 40 years. The concept is good, just need to kind of rework a little bit of the agreement.
And to further answer your question, staff and I met with the new management of the YMCA a couple weeks ago, and we are planning on bringing them back before council to talk about all the good things that are happening at the YMCA, specifically the pool.
This is the part of the plan that is the nerd part, so I'm going to apologize for it and try and work through it quickly. But what this chart shows you is the number of facilities of each type you have in the city now, your current level of service per 10,000. It compares you to your benchmark average, and then it shows you the recommended level of service. And the reason we're putting this here is it really begins to show you some of the changes that we're recommending. So going back to that initial slide where we said to keep the current level of service, you would just have to double the number of facilities. From this chart is why we're actually, in some cases, doing a little bit more than doubling. So what I just want to draw your attention to is the pool. We're increasing the level of service because at this point in time, we feel that you're already short of pool. If you look at softball fields and baseball fields, again, based on community comment, things that we've heard, we feel that you're going to need to increase the level of service you're currently providing. So it's a way of saying we feel at this point in time you may already be a little bit behind. We'd certainly say the same thing for soccer fields. If you look at things like tennis courts, we've had almost no demand or comment about tennis courts. So we actually brought your standard down, brought yours up a little bit, but brought it down from what the benchmark average would be.
How about pickleball?
Pickleball is huge. And I don't know, I'm trying to remember.
Maybe
if
we
the plan
should,
had a pickleball standard.
slash pickleball on that
Yeah,
one, because
yeah.
that is the game.
Yeah, so we are increasing your standard somewhat. But we're not ratcheting it up way high. And you can put pickleball on a tennis court. You can half paint a tennis court for pickleball.
That's worked very well for us. It's just drawing some additional lines so it can be multi-use tennis and pickleball court.
Great.
And that's how we meet that demand right now. It's worked very well.
You'll see for some other things like the splash park and the skate park, those are great regional facilities. As I said earlier, there wasn't really demand for another one. I think there's probably demand to keep those upgraded and updated, but certainly, we don't need to provide more than the current rate that we're providing. And these are the numbers that will ultimately drive some of the costs that we'll be talking about, Rick will be talking about towards the end of the presentation.
Leslie, I'm not sure if this is you or Nathan, is the, two things came to my mind about the pools. Number one is, was there a big demand, if you will, for community pools?
Actually, if it's okay, Ken did a special pool, is that right, Liam? Ken did a special pool study as part of this plan, and he's somewhat of
There
a
is demand from
Yeah.
what we heard from the public, so.
huge public demand.
I think, yeah, to answer your first question, yes, we heard through all the public input mechanisms, that'll come actually up in our next segment here, that was one of the very high levels of demand told to us by the general public. I think we also looked at what you have. We have to leverage up your relationship with the Y for that facility, but that's obviously at the far end of your community, and it does have a unique utilization for primarily competitive swimming, which is fine, and it needs to be addressed. On the other side, your only other real obvious pool is Loma Linda, and that's a great facility, but that's really a neighborhood-based aquatic amenity, and that needs to remain that way. I think one of the things we saw out of that is that, yes, there's going to needs to be some improvements made to that facility over time, but that's not a facility that ever should be designed or modified to serve as a community-wide, even a regionally wide within the city as a pool. It's a neighborhood-based pool and needs to remain that way. So when we take that kind of out of the equation a little bit or say, okay, its role is limited, then yes, we're hearing the demand of it from the community, and you don't really have the resources long-term to meet that demand. So that's why, yeah, that's showing up the way it is.
Okay, thanks.
Carrie?
I got it. Took me a second there. Yeah, when we're talking about the pools, I guess one thing that comes to mind when we're talking about upgrading the pools, and we've talked about this, I think, before, is when you see cities like Buckeye or Glendale that have I want to say state-of-the-art when we're talking about pools, the lazy rivers, the slides, the waves and the other things that actually bring people. Like, I know we will drive over, even though we have a pool at our house, we will drive to some of the pools that have those amenities. We will go to Glendale or Peoria. So when they were talking about what amenities, did those type of water features, were those brought up?
I think the answer is yes. I think that's one of the issues that you have is that
But
Changes in impact fee legislation severely limits the type of aquatic facility that we can build.
Now, you just said that. Would you just, if you wanted the city manager to do that, what made that change? Because our public doesn't even know half of these changes still to this day. And so we need to, every time we talk about this in community development, anything we do, we need to bring up those bills that they pass that have hurt our city over and over and over again, because I want us to hound them on this, because it has hurt the West Valley.
Rick.
So who would like to speak to that? These are new. These are new, and they're very hard. You can just hold it in your hand.
Well, very quickly, there was it really impacts development impact fee legislation, development impact fees, and swimming pools are permitted under the new impact fee legislation. Aquatic centers are not. So you're very limited, just like you're limited to you can't provide impact fees for a park that's more than 30 acres in size. So the restrictions that came down are going to crimp how much money you can raise. at least from development fees.
Now, you can still build that aquatic facility, it would just have to be funded by a different mechanism.
Right.
And we just want to call it pool.
Only the definition.
What's in the definition? What is an aquatics? Did they give us a definition? Because a pool with a slide, to me, is a pool with a slide, not an aquatic center.
Council member Martino, in fact, they are working on, the league, as I understand, is Cities and Towns has an attorney that's beginning to work on those definitions now.
Good. Thank you. Yes,
This is
Sherilyn?
I'm kind of confused myself, I think, in my thinking, but when you're talking about the one pool in Goodyear, what are you talking about?
Loma Linda.
Loma Linda. So the Y pool does not factor into this?
No, for a couple reasons. One, it's a Y pool, so you need to be a member of the Y to use it. It's not, the pool is heavily programmed by the Y. It's not a
Doesn't come
true
in our
community
recreation
pool.
department.
But it's also the school, high school district's pool. I
Right,
mean,
and it's a
you know,
competitive
it's-
pool. It's really designed as a competitive pool.
We do get some community use out of it several days a year, where residents can come for free and swim, but
And there is a
truly make an
discount.
impact the need
There is a
for-
discount.
What about our,
Go on.
what about our city league, or the competition part of the swimming? Is that, they obviously don't have to be members of the Y to participate in a league, do they?
They can participate through Loma Linda Pool, through our recreation program. We have our own swim team, and it's a recreational swim team, or they can choose to graduate to the more competitive swimming that takes place at the Y. But to participate, they do have to pay additional participation fees.
I see. Is that how we envisioned it when, I was kind of involved. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. You were involved.
Don't apologize, just say what you think, that's what
I'm
this is
just
supposed
trying
to be
to
for.
clarify in my mind, has this evolved into something over the years, or is that the way it was set up at the beginning?
It's the way it has been set up since day one.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry, I'm not going to say
There are
sorry
discounts
anymore,
for
but
residents
you
and-
interrupt all the time, so go ahead.
Mayor, members of the council, we've got about 5 minutes left of our hour, so I'm going to go through outreach quickly. We talked with a lot of folks. They're listed on the slide.
Excuse me, I'm going to interrupt you right
Yeah.
now, because you just, the mayor's edgy here. You can go until we're done.
Okay.
Okay? We were hired as council people to solve problems.
Right.
And we're here tonight, and if it takes longer, people can, they get restless in the
Well, I didn't
audience,
want
they
to
can
abuse
take
your
more
time, that's all.
Yes,
It wasn't
go
that.
right ahead
I
and
was worried
finish
about
this.
mine.
Okay, thank
Please
you.
forgive me, I didn't mean to say it that way. So outreach was extensive. We really did participate a lot through the Goodyear Connects effort. We went through all of the community meetings in February of last year. We had a lot of people attend those meetings. You can see on that top slide, a lot of people put dots on things. We also had 2 days of focus groups where we met with all types of park and recreation users, and they were very good, frank discussions. We met with HOAs about sharing facilities. We met with the leagues. We met with independent providers. We met with the BMX folks. We met with folks from the skate park. We had a lot of great information from the teens. We met with the Y, schools, charter schools. We tried to meet with everyone. We had a community-wide visioning meeting, which some of you attended, and we really used that time to try to, the whole team was there, inform people about some of the challenges we face in the future providing parks and recreation, and also ask them about how they want to see this provided in the future. And I think it educated us, and I hope it also educated the community a little bit. We did do, just for your information, a presentation on the impact fees and restrictions that those brought, and I think that was news to a lot of folks. We also did a web-based resident survey, and it was what I would call an informal survey. We used SurveyMonkey. We blasted everyone that ever took a Parks and Rec program. We put it out on Goodyear Connects. We got over 200 responses, and so if we did a random, telephone survey, that would have been more than a statistically significant survey. SurveyMonkey has a lot of tools to make sure that people aren't sending the same information in again and again, and so there weren't duplicate responses. And it was a pretty, I think, good survey. We checked the basic demographic information against the city, and it more or less represented the city. Typically of these surveys, the over 18 to about 60 age was overrepresented, as was some of the older community, and very young people were not as well represented simply because they typically don't get online and get the kind of information. We did 5 presentations to the Parks and Recreation Advisory Commission. I actually think that may have been more, but I can document 5. We did 2 presentations to the General Plan Advisory Committee, and I discussed those earlier. We did 2 days of field work out in the field. We did site assessments, and that's part of the outreach, because during that, we spoke with probably everyone on the maintenance staff. We spoke with folks using the parks at the time. It was a really helpful time. And then we also did just staff interviews, so with David's group and folks that work in administration, and we really tried to understand the challenges that they have in just executing parks and recreation, and some of that is addressed in the plan as well. What we learned, and I'm just going to point this out from the survey, because I think it's telling, is that, from the I think it was the 2012 household survey, you all know parks and recreation is really important, and just listening to you, we know it's important. We know it's important from my participation as facilitator in the general plan. When we did this survey, again, this was the Survey Monkey that we sent out, so I would call it an informal survey. What we found out is that about half your population is satisfied, and about 12% is very satisfied. And when you look at those in terms of park recreation numbers, you've got a third of your population that says, not so great. And so what that tells us is you're doing a lot with what you have, but you've got some, as Ken puts it, you've got some catch-up to do. And I think really your restrictions are facilities. You're just doing as much, you've gone as far as you can go with what you've got. You've done a great job with what you've got, but it's just time. You're growing so quickly to kind of make that next step, next evolution.
Joe?
Just observation on, as I was going through this chart, I wasn't quite sure what it was telling me, only because if 70-some% say we need more parks and more trails, to me, it seems the percentage of satisfaction would have been a little different than what I see here, unless the questions are asked, what's your satisfaction with what the current program is, as opposed to what you like to see, because when I see 72% saying we don't have enough, I would expect the unsatisfied or dissatisfied to be greater than 8%, or you kind of see where I'm kind of coming from with these pie
The
charts
first
here?
question, these questions weren't asked in comparison.
Okay.
This first question was generally, how satisfied are you? And I think from the people that replied, they like what they have. And the next question is, you think we need more? And that's where it's overwhelmingly yes.
Okay.
Some of the consistent things we've heard, and you've pretty much heard these from all of our residents already, and things were, one, we need more parks and rec facilities. I would say a community center was on the top of the list. A pool is pretty important next to that, and also fields were huge. I mean, the issue with fields are that a lot of the leagues in towns can't have tournaments in towns because we don't have enough fields in one location, so they can't rotate the games.
Joanne?
On that, Nathan, and I don't remember how much land is still available around the ballpark that is technically the cities or not, but with the water that's going to be piped to the ballpark, is it possible to take some of the land and turn it into some of these soccer fields, football fields that are needed if we have that water that's going to be coming towards there? I was just thinking outside the box of what we might be able to take care of in an easier fashion with that infrastructure coming. And I remember from my kids' football days, Pop Warner was always crazy because there was never enough fields in that same way. So I was just wondering, is there anything left?
Yeah, currently, right now, the city-owned land has to be maintained for parking, so it truly functions as a multi-use field, but its primary purpose is for parking during spring training, and contractually, we're obligated to maintain that level of parking standards, so there is no excess land right now that is owned by the city around the ballpark.
Okay, so I guess for the future, my question would be on the acreage that we do have, the 100-acre park or the 40-acre park, whatever it is it what would it cost us to put in some simple, soccer fields, probably with bathrooms, parking, certain things like that? I mean, what were we looking at?
I don't know if it showed in that chart you had in here, so
Is
if
it
you
in here?
give her the
Okay.
page to look at, because it does have
And I apologize, I don't have my book, I left it on the page.
For a standard community 30-acre park, active type park is about $10 to $11 million. That is for ball fields and soccer fields.
Okay,
It's 10 to 11 million.
10 to 11. That's, okay, beyond than just a grassy knoll that people can go out and play soccer. All right.
Thank you. Any other question? Go ahead.
And then I think the other kind of important thing that we heard from the community was healthy communities. And it was, I just have to say, one of the very cool, for example, it just shows the level of commitment, I think, is when we're talking about what could go in a community center. This actually came from the Parks and Rec Commission. The idea of a commercial kitchen. So the city could offer classes on healthy cooking and healthy eating. And so I just think that that's this interest in a healthy community, how far down and how integral that feeling is to this community. Of course, that feeds into trails and programs and all those kinds of things that Parks and Recreation provide. Some of the just facility needs, again, they're completely driven by the programs that I just talked about. Trails, and did I mention trails? Community center, absolutely on the top of the list. Fields are hugely important, and an aquatic facility or community pool. I might add, combined to trails and tied to trails, one of the coolest things about Goodyear is you have the most, I've done these plans now around the state for a while. I've done enough that I think I can say you have such a very unique rec community. You have people that really are tied to the outdoors. You've got a huge bike community, all types of bikers. It's tremendous. You've got a very avid hiking community. And it's not because it's typically older citizens, retired citizens, or avid hikers. It's across the board in Goodyear. It's a really dynamic community. You've got also huge interest in leagues, huge interest in sports. So it's a really, really nice, fun, from a rec planning standpoint, diverse community to work with, because everything you might want, there is an interest in. And it's a fairly diverse group. So the trails include a lot of the bike stuff. I'm now going to just talk about the key recommendations, and then after that, we're going to talk about ways to fund this list of opportunities that the plan talks about. In the short term, we kind of broke everything up in the plan, if you read it, short, mid, and long term, because we know everything can't happen at once. The short term is immediate now through 2017. Most of those changes are what I would call policy changes, simply because just before you get the capital together to fund something, 3 years really just, that's a blink of an eye. So some of the things that we're suggesting is stuff that we've already talked about. The park standards for public and private parks included in the plan. And I want to be, and Nathan's made sure that I'm very clear about this. What we are talking about is a shift in development policy that would say to developers, all your open space can't be drainage anymore. And a portion of that open space, 5 acres, high and dry, needs to be a neighborhood park, and you have to have a neighborhood park within a quarter mile of all residences. So if you're a smaller development, let's say an 80-acre development, and you're going to build a neighborhood park, the city, this sort of opens the door for the city to begin to develop policies where, for example, developers could either contribute a portion of land or funds that could be used to buy land to create a neighborhood park. Or if you're an 80-acre development surrounded by industrial, you have to provide a 5-acre neighborhood park. Residents have to have access to neighborhood parks within the city. If you're an 80-acre development built next to a completely gated community next to you that does not allow your residents, your new development residents, access to that park, then you need to provide them with a park. So it's a very tough standard, and I just want you to be aware that we are recommending it. The same thing for trails. We have a trails plan. It's a detailed plan. Most of our trails are along washes that wouldn't be developed anyway, or roadways, or the canals. But we're saying that if that trail alignment is part of your development, it needs to remain a publicly accessible trail, and you need to build it.
Pebble Creek.
And that, again, goes back to Pebble Creek. So what that would prevent would be a Pebble Creek situation. If you're going to build a trail along a wash and the next development comes down and they want to build a golf course around that wash, that's great. Build a golf course, but you need to maintain that public access trail along the wash through the golf course. And that's not unusual. I mean, I can tell you when I first moved to Phoenix, I lived next to a golf course, and I used to trail through the golf course all the time. If you go to Tempe, there are trails through golf courses. So it's not an unusual thing to have happen. It's just now we're not going to let these things, we've thought about them beforehand. We've learned from our experiences. One of the things that we...
I'm sorry, Leslie, and on that point, In the past, years ago, we had a open space and trail systems study done. I remember Kevin Kugler did it. And we had all thought way back then that all of our developments would have this trail system that would connect to each other. And you know what? It kind of got lost. And some developments had it, some didn't. And I think it's back to setting that standard and that policy. It's almost like it has to become part of the boilerplate
They have
of
to get
stipulations
the-
that we see every time. Right.
They have to do the
have to
community
be there,
development
or it's gonna
around
get
the
forgotten
table.
again.
When the developer comes in with the community, wants to develop it,
Right.
then Parks and Rec should be in on that team
Yes.
and look it over and say, well, there is this connectivity, and that's when it should be presented, so that it's...
That's right.
And Mayor, Councilmember Osborne, you are right, and that is in the plan. We very specifically recommend, not only in the administration section of the plan where we're recommending staff be added, but in the trails and parks section of the plan, staff be included in the review team for all those plans, so that they make sure that they sit there with their parks plan the same way streets sits there with their streets plan and says, got to put a trail here. And that comes in your pre-application process and through the entire development review process.
But it's
We're also
really giving the plan teeth so that we're able to
Right.
implement these standards. So-
We also recommended changes in ordinance, so, and in the development standards. So,
And actually, I think that will be, when a developer thinks about that, that's a real selling point. I mean, that's an attribute, really, when you're selling a piece of property and you know that you're going to give your entire community that access to that trail. So I think it can be reversed. It isn't a penalty to the developers, it's just going to be another, amenity to have, so,
Look forward to all that paperwork.
yeah.
along that, we know that some of the master plans, especially in Central Goodyear, will probably come in for replatting or for changes. We're just suggesting that as that happens, we also begin to look at those and require some of the park upgrades that we're suggesting in the plan. A new thing is establishing a capital reserve fund in the plan. Right now, you don't have one, you've never had one, and that's really important for maintaining facilities and making sure that you're not stuck with these big bills, every couple of years, but to really begin to even out, am I saying that right, your expenditures over time for maintenance and keeping your facilities upgraded. Another huge opportunity you have is with the El Rio planning effort, which is beginning to get underway, and working with Maricopa County, Estrella Park, that floodplain, those are huge opportunities for some kind of a regional citywide park that you could begin to get the land for. And the reason we call that out separately goes back to the development fee law. Because you are restricted to 30 acres with your development fees, you only have a 30-acre park. And when you look at a 30-acre park, you can get a lot in it, but it's mostly fields. Some of those more unique park opportunities, I know, for example, we're talking about a train, or, for example, a wildlife center, or I know you're building I just heard today, this demonstration garden, all those kinds of very neat, cool things that happen in those larger parks. You can't build with development fees. So if you can begin to leverage your relationships with the county, some of your natural resources to get some of that land for free, that's going to reduce your development costs. In the midterm, we're suggesting, that you provide a community center. Again, we don't have to go through that. We've talked about it enough. And as I mentioned earlier, 2 community parks. That's demand. Again, if you double the size that you are now, 2 community parks in 15 years isn't a lot. You actually could probably use 3. Updating the Loma Linda pool, we've talked about that, and also building a new pool. And Ken has asked me to say, do not think updating the Loma Linda pool takes care of the need for a new pool. The Loma Linda pool is a neighborhood pool. And then also putting trails in Bullard Wash from I-10 to the Gila River. And Rick's going to talk a little bit under cost about trails cost, but just what I wanted to say here is that the Bullard Wash Trail is, in our opinion, a signature trail for the city. We know that Bullard Wash has some challenges in terms of channelization to get it developed, but we also think that there are some interim opportunities to build a trail in more of I'll use the term guerrilla trail, which doesn't have to be a paved, lit, fancy trail. Maybe you could just sign a path and get some access agreements. But we think that this is something that should happen at least in the midterm, and we would love to see it happen in the short term. And the only reason we moved it to the midterm was for funding. And I think based on our discussions today, we'll probably even be going back and amending the plan to talk about using some of those, what I would call guerrilla opportunities, to create access for that trail. What I will say is if you look at that trail, it goes to the Bullard Road Bridge. And at the bottom of the Bullard Road Bridge is a trailhead that was built through the El Rio demonstration project, where you can walk into the Gila River, and there is a lake with birds and trees and everything else you want to see, and it connects right to the park. And it's such a critical opportunity for the plan, and I think it could really be a great demonstration project. And I'll stop there, because I'm so
Now, I can see,
passionate.
though, that on the signage, after our being sued for someone hitting a sign, that's most important that we put that in the budget, on how many signs, on the right kind of direction, and all of that on this, because that can happen. So I just want to make sure we're emphasizing signage on developing this.
And we actually have a lot of recommendations for
You
signage.
do in there. I just want to say it out to the public. You absolutely do.
And then just long-term, we do recommend that you do develop a citywide park. You know, you're going to be, in 2030, you're going to be 145, 150,000 people. It's time. You need a big park. And so that, we think the opportunity is along the Gila River, is you grow towards the south and you become a city of 300,000 or 500,000. There's a lot of BLM land down there, and there's some tremendous opportunities down there as well to identify some parcels, and also the Waterman Wash, and along the Waterman Wash there's some good opportunities. So with that, we've talked about all the cool things we can do. Now Rick's going to talk about how to pay for it.
Yeah, that's the fun part of the program. Now you get to the reality of it. And you can see the costs that are associated with the key goals and projects that were outlined previously. Nothing really happening in the short term. We do have some information from your finance department on preliminary capital improvements that may be programmed here in the next 10 years or so. And they have, right now, the preliminary numbers we've been given is a community center and a community park would be built. The community center, I think, with Public Improvement Corporation bonds from the ballpark, and the community park, I think I said that right, the community park with impact fees. And we're also assuming that as the economy starts to improve, as you start to grow a little bit more, that you're going to have the ability. The problem is right now, obviously, you don't have the property tax valuations to support bonding and things like that, unless you raise property taxes quite a bit. You're hit with a double whammy in effect. Your property tax base dropped by 40%. And then 2 years ago came along Proposition 107, which said your property taxes cannot increase on individual properties more than 5% a year. So you drop 40% on your property tax. To get back just to where you were, you have to increase by 80%. So it's just simple mathematics. It's going to take a long time for you to get back to that point. So it's a long, slow trip out of the desperation a lot of cities have been in. Not so much you, really, but a lot of cities are in much more desperate shape. But we think that there's probably ability in the next 10 years to do another community park and a swimming pool, which is very basic. We're talking about just a pool in the ground, basically. If you combine it with a community center, you'd be able to use the same resources there, and it may work better to have the pool and the community center together on the same site.
Joe?
I understand the ballpark set-aside. That was one of the issues we had. My concern is that Public Improvement Corporation bond, I assume the payment of that debt service will be sales tax. Is that correct?
Yes.
No? I'm hearing no back here.
On the PIC? Oh, PIC set aside.
Just as a correction, funding in our capital improvement plan for that was the PIC set aside. Remember, half of it,
Right.
the council said to put towards the CIP, towards a project. That was the project that was referred to. So it isn't new debt for that $9.5 million. That is that set aside.
Okay, so what I mean by set-aside, that's construction sales tax going in, or is it part of that one-time or ongoing sales tax that's going into it. My only concern is if we're using ongoing general fund sales tax money for something other than the ballpark to pay debt service.
We're not doing any additional debt
Okay.
service. This is the money that we set aside for the existing PIC bonds, using it. So
Okay, so it's real money?
it's real
Cash.
money.
Okay.
It is very real money,
Okay,
yes.
okay. Yeah, I just want to clarify that it's not debt that's being used. Okay.
So those costs in the short term, we think are about $32.5 million, and then you add to that, 6 miles of trail or so at very modest cost, another $2 million. So some sizable needs that are showing up here, and the ability, once again, to fund those is very limited at this point. If you look back a year ago, I don't think there was any funding for capital improvements for parks and recreation. So at least this year, you have some indication that in the next 10 years, things are looking positive. They will continue to look positive as you move forward. And then in the long term, you can see more community centers, 2 more parks, 2 more swimming pools, another $43 million till 2030. And to tell you the truth, that does not even make demand. You're on such a proposition of just trying to make up what you have not provided in the past, and on top of that, the growth. So there could be another $50 million of unmet demand for facilities beyond what we're showing here. And that's just to get back to where you should be today, plus the growth that you're going to see. So we looked at some funding options. There's a bond authority approved by the voters, authorization approved by the voters back in the early 2000s, 2003, 4, something like that. There's $32 million of that is unused, issued at this point, that can be used for parks and recreation facilities. It's just a matter of having the property tax base once again to pay for those bonds. Impact fees are forecast at $11 million over the next 10 years. Your Parks and Recreation impact fee study for the development fees was a very conservative study. And your impact fee that I understand is being proposed at this point is below average for most cities around the valley. You're about half what the average is for a lot of cities around the valley. That's an opportunity for you going forward to take a look and reevaluate that in the future. But it is a very conservative study, and it isn't producing a lot of money that could be used in the future. We mentioned the PIC bonds, the set-aside is another opportunity. We looked at dedicated sales tax and BBB tax, bed, board, and booze tax. It's is now in operation, has been for a long time in Flagstaff, and has worked very well for them. And those can produce some funds for you in the future. The issue you have to consider is what's that going to mean to your property tax or your sales tax rates, which are already, for the most part, above average. And particularly for big-ticket items, cars, appliances, electronics, things of that nature, is that going to send people elsewhere to buy those types of things if your sales tax rates are high? So they can produce money for you, but it's a consideration you have to think about. Obviously, partnerships, to continue with the partnerships you have with the schools, working with developers. Public-private partnerships is something you should strongly consider for major facilities. I can give you one good example in Gilbert. Gilbert owns some land out in the southwest part of the town. They leased it to an outfit that built an ice rink on that land. They lease the land to the ice rink. They get back some benefits from that in terms of times that people can use the facility, but it's just a very simple public-private partnership with an entity. And lastly, grants are available. They come and go. They're competitive, so they're difficult to get in any large amounts, but obviously they're available. And I'll turn it back to Leslie or Nathan.
So, are there any comments on finance before we go to next steps? Just going to be the press?
I think we got that picture quite clearly. Pretty clear. I don't know whether to smile or frown, but thank you.
So there are some next steps to this plan. We wanted to make sure that we got your feedback before we brought this out for public review. But our goal is to bring it out with this feedback for public review in April, which means we'll get it posted. In May, we'd like to have a public workshop to review the plan, get folks really to tell us if we're meeting their needs and how they feel about it. One of the things that I'd also like to get your feedback on is our survey. Rick gave you some ideas for funding mechanisms, but we have money in the budget to survey on what's going to work. The bottom line is that bonds ultimately result in the T word. And the question is, does your community support that? It's always easy to have people say we need more Parks and Rec. It's usually harder to have them to connect that to the concept of we have to pay for Parks and Rec. And especially with the changes in development fees where people aren't used to paying as they go, really, and realizing that they're not now paying for these facilities when they buy a house, but they're going to now need to pay for them as a resident in a tax situation. The survey can help educate people about that, but it can also help you get some information on their preference and how they're willing to pay for it. So that would be one thing we'd like to know, or any questions, any of these funding mechanisms we mentioned you don't want us bringing up, or are there ones you want us to survey on that we haven't mentioned, or concepts? And you can either give us that information tonight, or through Nathan, or I guess Brian, provide that feedback to us. And that survey will be a statistically significant random dial phone survey with compensation for cell phones. Based on that, we'll then include that information in the plan. We'll make some final revisions in June, and then we'll be back to the Parks and Recreation Commission, and then to you for plan adoption in the summer.
Bill?
Leslie, on this survey, you're talking about a standalone survey that just talks about funding. Is that what I'm reading? I debated about even asking this question as I look back toward the communications folks sitting in the back of the room. We're getting ready to do our citizens survey. Is it possible to add a few more questions and do this all in one fell swoop?
It's, Mayor and Councilmember Stipp, the survey...
it's already been done, I'm
It's
sorry.
all done. We actually come back before council.
Yes.
You'll have the
You
draft
told me.
report in mid-April.
He told me that today. You think I'd pay attention?
I'm feeling very good on this.
Yeah, he told me about it today, and that's why I'm like, oh, we haven't done it yet? And then he was actually briefed me that we...
Added to my score
Preliminary,
there.
yeah. Add it up there.
What a good idea.
What a great idea.
Mayor, Councilmember Nathan just said maybe if we're just unaware of that survey just came out, but it might be an opportunity to confirm some of the findings. I don't know what that survey asked about.
Yes, and to address that specifically, we have the final draft, so our director team, actually on April 1st, will be having a conference with their consultants just to review any edits, minor edits that may be needed at this point, or clarification. Council will have that in mid-April. Part of that will, though, reveal what the top wants of our citizens have, and I have to tell you, it's a really good study. I had an opportunity to go through it last week, and again, on Monday, we'll be visiting with the consultant one last time. But I think we wanted to get it in your hands by mid-April because it could have, policy direction, especially as you look out into the future to address what the citizens are asking for. But I would tell you we're being fairly consistent with the direction of the community with what we're doing with our CIP.
Sherry?
Thank you very much for the great presentation. I really appreciate it. It gives me a lot of excitement for the future and what's going to come here. And thank you, Nathan, for all the work you've done. And we've added a lot already, and I can see where we can add a lot more. When you're talking about the funding survey, I would like to see just send it all out so we can find the pulse of the community and give them all the options out there so we can see where our citizens are and what their positions are. It doesn't mean we're going to do one or the other, but I would like to have as much information as possible personally.
Joanne?
I have one question. You know, our city, for the last quite a few years, has constantly been playing catch-up because of the growth. You know, we've had to put in infrastructure, and we've had to increase all of our public safety. I mean, there's this constant catch-up. And, but I'm just out of curiosity, and this may be something you have to tell me later, but if you were to look at across the nation, livable cities, or, you know, top-notch cities that have parks and system, you know, recreation trails, things like that, and you were to compare their funding mechanisms, whether it was property tax or sales tax, funding that came straight from general fund, what is that percent? What does that look like? What does that picture look like? And you know, that's not saying Goodyear needs to be compared apple to apple or anything like that, but I'm just curious, you know, because we've been a bit unique in the fact that we're constantly catching up with this growth. But if you were to look at some best practices of cities that have been successful with those systems, what does it look like?
Well, Mayor, Councilmember, you know, there's the easy answer, I think, and then the more realistic answer.
Right.
I think that the more realistic answer is that some of the best systems and the best cities with regards to Parks and Rec have assets that they've recognized early on and they've built on. And those weren't funded through one source. They were funded through a variety of sources. And they had, like you guys, they had the foresight to say, let's get on this. And they had a long-term vision.
Gotcha.
So those best cities are typically way older than Goodyear.
Well, certainly.
What I would say is the newer cities, and I would put Scottsdale in the newer city category, I'd put Phoenix and their mountain preserves in the newer category. Sales tax. They have a dedicated funding source, and they early on bit the bullet. And that goes, Scottsdale is a really good example of a city within the past, 12, 15 years that passed a sales tax to do that. And it goes back to the Citizens Committee. It was really not a small group of people saying, ye shall, but it was, you know, seeded, clearly. I mean, we were around from the beginning of that. It was certainly seeded. But the business community seeded it. The resorts, in fact, Scottsdale, were the ones that recognized it. But that came from a mayor who's now head of the Audubon Society. So it wasn't, I would say, a completely spontaneous emergence. I think people were educated and informed, and the city supported the formation of those citizen groups to educate the rest of the community to say we need a dedicated source. And typically, that dedicated source is a sales tax, because you're always going to grow. You know, there's going to be a point where you start getting denser and your facilities will start getting more complex, but you're going to need to meet those needs.
So what you're saying is really in all, and to just do a survey, maybe it's better not to do it until you've had that outreach by your citizens committee? Or is it, I mean, so you do the survey and they come back and say, no way.
Well, I think
because you haven't been out there talking about it.
I think the survey tells you where you need to work. I think if you take the pulse of the community and you know, when we did Flagstaff, typically when we do these surveys, everybody hates taxes. So they vote against taxes and they vote on a bed and boards tax, because that's, you know, tax everybody else, not me. But when we went to Flagstaff, which is a very, I would say, open space, recreation aware community, and they know that supports their community, they voted for a sales tax, which I would say was sort of interesting because it sort of freaked out their council. So I think that it'll show you where you need to work. Maybe it is people that are willing to support a dedicated sales tax. Maybe people say, let's bond. We're ready for a tax that's a limited time. We're ready for a property tax. People might say form a district and then have a separate board that manages the funds. So there's lots of ways, and if everybody says absolutely not, it tells you the amount of education maybe that you need to do as well. So I think it's good to figure out where you're starting from.
And just from some of the outreach that we heard from the community groups that we engaged, their user groups were very open to dedicated sales tax opportunities to fund these facilities, including those discussions that we had with those folks in fully developed communities. They still understood and recognized the importance of facilities citywide.
Joe?
You know, I understand sales tax has a tendency to come up with a lot of the funding sources, and I think your outreach and your education is critical. And the reason being is when you look at Scottsdale and Peoria or some of those others, and you look at their total sales tax versus what our general sales tax rate is, they have a little more latitude there to get up to where we are, you know, versus where we are right now at the 2.5. And I just think that's our biggest challenge. You talk about the food tax, we're already at 4. So if we throw another one on there, we'd be at 5. So the thing is where our levels are right now, and that's why education and outreach, I think, is real important, because in my view, and I don't know what your survey is going to come back, for us to be successful in that, we've got to get that across, find out to what they want that vision and how they want that implemented, because there will be a cost, and how will we compete with the others as a result of not having that flexibility like some of the others have, because we're at sort of that upper echelon on our general. So I think the education, how much they want it, what it's going to cost them, the fact that a lot of our sales tax comes from people outside the city than the ones that live here, you know, all that's got to be part of this process as you kind of move forward on there. But that's why I've always been a big proponent as we move forward, even with our sales tax at some point, by going to the 2.5, it gives us not nearly as much flexibility on our general as if it was at 2.25. I know we can't do it now, but by adding an additional tax, because we're at the top, you know, tail end, or even with the food. So I'd be really curious as they go through the education to see, you know, what kind of options we have there.
You do have some choices, though, on those taxes. You have some different placement of certain amounts of taxes. So, yes, Bill?
You know, I'm just generically wondering if, if we drive a survey toward what's your interest in funding just parks, we've got water issues that we need to get addressed on a very capital intensive, that maybe we need to think about this, not just on the park side, but just kind of overall, that if we're going to survey the community about a funding mechanism, maybe we need to be thinking about asking a whole host of questions, not just related to parks.
Yeah, let's use it.
Let's use it use it
right,
wisely.
Right. Wally?
Well, I'd like to thank you for this plan. It's an excellent plan, and it is very aggressive, and it does, it will make us stop and think of how forward we want to go and how much we want to step out. And I thank you for that, because it's very difficult to know how much to do in a city when we are so limited. But we're making wonderful progress, and I want to thank all of you for that. I would like to just hear what the public has to say about how we fund this. I think it's very important, because in all of the public hearing meetings that I went to, and I think I went to all of them, I did not have anyone tell me that they would not pay a tax to get a new building, to get a multi-gen building, or to get an aquatic center. Our users, I believe, understand the cost of these facilities, and they understand we don't have them and we don't have the money for them. And they also understand how the ballpark plays in our financial picture of this city. So if we could get an idea of what the public would want, then it would be easier for us to go out and form a citizens committee or do a huge outreach. And it's not going to happen quickly, but it will start the conversation, and that's what we need to do. We may not be successful in the next 5 years or so, but the conversation is going, because anyone that uses any of our equipment, our sporting facilities now, they know we don't have enough. We need more soccer fields. We need more baseball fields. We need a place where kids can play competitive basketball, and it's there. We need an aquatic center. You know, we want people to be able to stay in our city and have a wonderful quality of life, and our Parks Department is a very integral part of that. And I just thank you for this wonderful plan, and I look forward to trying to figure out how we go forward with it.
Thank you, Wally. Anybody else? Well, again, thank you. Leslie, it's nice to see you back working with us again. It doesn't surprise me, the content and the quality of it. And team, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. We'll give you a moment to go, and I think everybody needs a break. So before we do the next presentation, 10-minute break, does that work? All right. 10 minutes. All right, we're back to the meeting, and we're going to go to the second item on, and that's to receive a presentation on the new Police Department Property and Evidence Facility. Jerry Geyer, Chief of Police, to present. Jerry?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm honored to be here tonight to talk to you and share information about property and evidence function within the Goodyear Police Department. But you got to keep in mind, property and evidence is only so interesting, so I'll try my best to keep up with the
Well, you did
Parks and
clear
Rec
the room, if
presentation.
you noticed. You're so loved. I couldn't resist that. Go ahead.
So tonight's presentation, I'll give you an overview of our property and evidence function. We'll talk about our standards and audits, which will include discussion about the International Association of Property and Evidence, which sort of guides us in our procedures. I'll talk to you about our current facility, and then I have a set of pictures that I want to show you. Then we'll discuss planning for the future, which will include plans for the purchase of a new building and the cost and timeline associated with that purchase, which will actually come to you next week, requesting your approval to proceed. Please, at any time, if you have questions, just stop me where we're at, and I'll be happy to answer those questions. The property evidence function is obviously one of the most critical in the police department. We are tasked with the intake, storage, and purging of property, which can include property which is evidence in a criminal case, and obviously that's the majority of the evidence that we have. Found property, and we respond all over the city. People just leave things around, so we respond all over the city and collect found property, and our task is to impound that property and do our best to get it back to the owners. We have property for safekeeping. If we go to a domestic violence call, a person who wants to hurt themselves, in many cases we will seize firearms or weapons, take those, hold on to those until the situation calms down, and then we'll release them back to the owners. And we have discarded property. We started our prescription drug box program where we collect hundreds of unwanted prescription drugs a month, which we destroy. And we have a whole variety of evidence in our facility, including everything from illegal drugs, large sums of money, firearms, lab or forensic evidence, thousands of pieces of media evidence, which includes CDs, DVDs, thumb drives. We have furniture, sporting equipment, electronics, construction equipment, everything that you can think of. We have a little bit of everything there. The International Association of Property and Evidence sets the guidelines, standards, and practices for property and evidence facilities across the country. Upon coming to Goodyear 2.5 years ago, the property and evidence function was one of my major concerns, as it should be with any police chief. We put policies and procedures into place following best practices as far as our operations. I had a professional audit company come in and do a formal audit. We began quarterly and random audits, which is a best practice. And I just want to clarify, I'll be sharing some issues with you tonight that came out of our audit. I'll be showing you some pictures of an overcrowded facility. I just want to assure you that at no time, none of our criminal cases are being compromised. The concerns I will talk to you about are strictly best practice and overcrowding related issues. I just want to assure you and our citizens that our evidence is secure and no criminal cases are in jeopardy. From the audit, we knew we had space issues that we would need to address in the coming years. We had security issues that were pointed out. We've addressed all those, and they're taken care of. We had storage issues such as property being commingled, meaning there are standards that say drugs can't be stored with other types of evidence, firearms have to be kept separate, that type of thing. We have a large floor safe in evidence. We don't have room for another safe, so we do have property that's commingled. It's not a best practice. We have chemicals that are being stored outside the building with no space for them to properly store them. We had refrigeration issues. We have a large walk-in refrigerator that I'm going to show you pictures of in a few minutes. It has mechanical problems. There's a large amount of forensics evidence in that refrigerator. We received a supplement that you granted for $40,000 2 years ago to replace the refrigerator. However, we just have nowhere to put it indoors. Even being outdoors is a problem, and it's not a best practice. So also, our lack of space has cost us our crime scene function for the most part. We have drying cabinets that we use to dry fluids and drugs that are stored in evidence. We've had to take those down and store them away to create more space for actual physical evidence. In fact, to give you an example, we recently had a big marijuana plant seizure, and marijuana has to be dried out thoroughly before you can package it or before you can destroy it or do anything with it. We actually had to hang marijuana plants from ceiling tiles all throughout the property facility in amongst the employees to dry the stuff out. So,
Were they happy?
probably, they were really happy. But,
I don't know that, I just read that somewhere.
Would that be a best practice?
As long as they weren't walking around with their scissors.
And it isn't a laughing matter, I'm sorry, but we just couldn't.
But the picture is.
The picture of it.
The picture is.
We no longer do fingerprints due to lack of space and personnel, but mostly lack of space. For example, if we go out and make a burglary arrest, take fingerprints and we want to tie the two together, we can't do that in our facility any longer. We have to send that to DPS lab. There is approximately a year turnaround to get stuff back from DPS. So they won't even do misdemeanor cases. The good thing is we don't really submit prints on too many misdemeanor cases, but there's a huge delay there. We have fuming hoods, which we use to lift prints in difficult surfaces. Those are stored away. We had 2 evidence technicians that are now in one office that they share with physical evidence stored in amongst them. And we have 4 patrol supervisors that have lost their offices due to evidence, due to being able to store evidence. Our crime scene tech, because she doesn't have any space, has to go out into an unsecured parking lot in the hot sun to mix chemicals. And we have a release room in the front of our current building. It's a small room, but it's used every day. People come in to get property. It's probably 6 feet by 6 feet. And there's no ventilation, there's no air condition. It's windowed off from anything else. So it's just a tiny room that gets hot, very hot. We had a homicide victim that came in who just lost a loved one and wanted to pick up some of her property. Because we have property stored in aisles and everything and in other buildings, it takes us 30, 45 minutes, an hour sometimes to find people's property. She was really overcome with the heat in that front room. There's no place to sit, along with the emotions of losing her loved one and picking up property. So that's the kind of atmosphere we're putting our citizens into with that facility. So right now we have a evidence facility that's about 2,000 square feet. Not only is it too small, but the roof is low. There's no chance to build shelves on top of each other or expand upward. So when we were out of room about 8 months ago, the only option we had was to start storing stuff over at the 103, the police patrol building. And we kicked a couple supervisors out of their offices, used their offices. We needed more refrigerators. We bought more refrigerators, moved them in there. So we moved our part of our evidence facility into that building. When we ran out of room there, we started taking stuff to Fire Station 2 in Estrella. So basically, it's not a good practice when you have property stored at 3 different locations in the city. But so we're doing that. And really, those are some of the issues, but it gives you an understanding of and shows you that we're out of space and really can't operate within best practices in our current facility. And some of the reasons that I see why we have such a significant increase in property and evidence is that last year we had a 400% increase in homicides. Good thing is we haven't had one in quite a while, so hopefully it was just a fluke. But and some more violent crime. Each of those crimes of that magnitude, we have to take a considerable amount of evidence. In the homicide, if you remember, we had a grandmother was a victim of a homicide last year. We took 400 pieces of evidence just off of one case. That included couches and furniture and beds and just huge items. And we have to keep that stuff for a long, long time. So second reason is we established a narcotics unit. They have been very, very successful combating drugs in Goodyear and getting the drugs out of the hands of our kids. But it comes with a large evidence requirement. They've shut down 3 grow houses and have seized large amounts of drugs this past year, furniture, complex lighting and ventilation systems, and other evidence. All that we've had to store. Our prescription drug box program, very successful, great community policing tool. It's very popular, especially with our senior community, but it comes with a price too. In fact, in 2013, we collected over 1,200 pounds of prescription drugs that we've had to destroy.
I am.
I'm there.
Yeah, great program. So, in fact, I'm guessing that about 80% of what we have in our evidence right now, we couldn't purge or get rid of even if we wanted to. It's there to stay for a while. And also, you know, the law now requires us to maintain evidence associated with homicides, certain sex crimes, and other serious crimes for 109 years.
Oh,
Meaning the majority of our evidence is going to outlive anybody in this room, and we're stuck with it.
gosh.
So they'll hold it through, you know, trial periods go for years, they have appeal periods which go on forever, and we're mandated to keep this stuff, you know, some of it for 109 years. So those are a few of the issues why our property and evidence has climbed to an inventory of 28,000 pieces, which is about a 54% increase of property coming in over the last year. I'm actually going to jump this slide. I went a little bit out of order, so we've covered everything on this slide. Okay, there you see a couple of graphs. That really shows you that from 2012 to 2013, 54% increase in items coming in. Went from 3,600 to over 5,500 last year. The good thing is, because of some of the reasons that I just talked to you about, I'm confident that number is going to level off a little bit. We saw an increase from 2011 and 2012 too, but I don't think we're going to consider to see this kind of percentage increase as we go into the future. Okay, also this slide, we pretty much covered everything on here too, so we're going to jump ahead.
So
Okay.
this, I have a
Sorry,
question.
Mayor.
So state legislation changed, our state made that change.
Yes.
And what was it before they made that change to 109?
There were some things that were 99 years. Obviously, that's not a huge increase when you're talking 99 years.
Okay.
I don't know exactly what we changed from 99 years to 109, but that is the standard with homicide evidence
Okay.
at the current time.
Thank you.
You see, this is general storage in our current evidence room. You can see it's just full of boxes, and every one of those boxes is full, like you can see the one open right there, with either envelopes or other evidentiary items. This is our vault. Really, the only thing that should be kept in the vault is money, guns, or drugs. As you can see on the floor, we have other things in there. The freezer on your right really shouldn't be in there, but there's just no other place for it, so that's where it sits. On the left, the top and bottom picture, those are offices. Currently, both evidence technician are in the top office, commingled with some evidence. The bottom is an office that one of them was in that we took away for use for storage. On the right, there's a picture of it's a storage room. It's supposed to be for our, you know, supplies and whatnot. It houses evidence. That thing on the left is our walk-in refrigerator. Got mechanical issues. You can see on the right, it is full. In fact, if you were to step in it, you would step into that little open space with the picture on the right, and there's no room for anything. So obviously, every time we go in there and they want to find a piece of property, they have to dig everything out. It is alarmed, which is a good thing. However, it's an audible alarm. If it's at nighttime on a weekend, we're going to hope one of the residents or somebody from our dispatch center that's currently there for the time being calls in and alerts us. We have had a failure with it, mechanical issues before. And also because it's outside, which again is not a best practice, we get condensation on the bottom of our boxes. When we go and pull them out, usually the bottom of the boxes are wet. This is Station 2 down in Estrella. As you can see, we've taken over some offices down there. That's property from a couple of our drug seizures. On the left, there's some couches and a bed and some lighting. On the right is some ventilation type equipment. This is property in the patrol building at 103. As you can see, the freezers there, we were out of freezer space, so we had to go out recently and purchase 2 freezers, which were put in those offices. The problem is they're not alarmed. One of them has already malfunctioned and went out. Just so happens it was during a week when one of our property officers was over there working. It was during the daytime. So he noticed that it wasn't working. We were able to get it repaired. If that would have happened at night or on the weekend, we may have had an issue. So, and now that you've really seen the state of our evidence, we can look at planning for the future. So about 8 months ago, we started looking at possible facilities to provide us some relief. And I didn't want to come to you saying I have a problem and no solution. So we started looking at some possible solutions. I wanted to find an option before we came looking for direction. We looked at several properties, city-owned, privately owned, rentals, and purchase. We found the La Luna building here. Out of everything we looked at, it provided by far the best option for meeting our standards, for future growth, for security, crime scene processing. It is already built out with offices, break room, restrooms, by far superior to what we need than anything else we looked at. In addition, the size at 7,400 square feet, my estimate is that this building will be fine for 20 years at least, if not longer. In addition, the building has a truck bay, allowing us to conduct crime scene processing in the air condition. The rear of the building is completely fenced and secure, allowing us to place and store chemicals and park vehicles in a secure location in the back. The building has only one entrance that you see there and no exterior windows, meaning it will be extremely secure. Really had everything we needed, but while we were looking and we were still examining options, we found ourselves in a timing issue because the building had received another purchase offer. And rather than taking the possibility of losing that building, we received permission to enter into negotiations on the property prior to the budget process. The project cost, the purchase price of the building was $546,000. We just got the appraisal back. The building appraised at $550,000. So the purchase price is under appraisal. Through the actual appraisal, the assessments and whatnot, the actual acquisition cost is going to be right around $558,000. And actually, we've had a little bit of a savings there, so actually it's a couple $1,000s less than that, but that's the approximate. This slideshow shows sort of our timeline, what we've already accomplished in the gray. You'll see down at the bottom, it's sort of off the screen, but closing the end of April, assuming we proceed with this, and 3 to 4 month build out, hopefully, if everything goes as planned, we can look at taking possession and be built out probably August. But just like with any of the possible buildings that we looked at, we've got tenant improvements. And these would be similar with anything we looked at, and actually more with some of the buildings. So our tenant improvements, our estimate you saw in the COAC was $300,000. I got an updated estimate from Regis just in the last couple of days at $332,000 to improve the building where it's ready to move into it for us. In addition to that, you will also see a supplemental coming through with this budget cycle where we, for $30,000 to buy the high-density shelving, rolling ladders, all the things we need to outfit the facility. And that's actually the end of the presentation. Any questions?
All right, thank you. It was very clear, so let's go ahead. Joe?
First of all, as a former employee many years ago, that actually looked pretty good with some of the pictures you've taken there. I mean, it's well overdue as far as running out of space, facility. As far back as I can remember, there's been issues dealing with that. But the question I have is more for the funding. Where is I assume something's coming to us, where's the money coming from?
Have Larry
He's
come
going
up.
to come up and address that.
The proposal that we have...
Can you just say your name and what department you're in for the
Larry
public?
Lang, Finance Director.
Thank
The
you.
proposal that we have to fund the purchase of the building is to use the funding that was for the marquee billboards in Bullard Wash that is not restricted to transportation. That was $500,000 up front, and the first year's payments that we received brings it up, I use for round numbers, $600,000. So that's the funding of the building as proposed, as I'm proposing it. The funding of the tenant improvements outlined in there, as Chief Geyer just indicated, in the budget process, there's a supplemental that was requested to fund those tenant improvements. We're planning on recommending approval of that supplemental, and if this is to proceed before the year starts, we were going to borrow the funding from another project in the general fund that will remain funded and then replace the money come July 1st so that we're never upside down on either project.
Go ahead, Joe.
Was there any other option, because I know that money's been sitting there in the Bullard, and I know it's there, but, you know, possibly using some of that money for transportation down the road. Is there any other options that you have where you could get the $600,000?
The difficulty, even there with the tenant improvements where we moved it into next year's budget and then sliding it up, is not my preferred practice of the funding. A concept like that could work, but that would reduce the one-time funding available in next year's budget. So that's my area of concern in doing any other approach. We looked through the various budget savings this year, CIP-type savings. Are there any items there? And there really aren't that that much in dollars that would generate enough.
Okay, so I guess the short is, that's really the only funding source you have, real money that you could take for this particular project.
That isn't appropriated for other purposes, that's
Okay.
correct.
Joanne?
So Chief, just in your opinion, obviously time seems to be of the essence here. You've run out of space. So location's good. I mean, if you were to say, well, we could save $200,000 if I was to build it over here. I mean, if we were to, had more time and build it ourselves, would there have been a huge cost savings to us? Or is it, we've just, time is really the critical element here?
Well, I think it's a combination. Time is obviously critical. That's why we're moving as fast as we're moving. I don't know that you could build a building like that and outfit the way we need it for that price.
For the record, that's what I wanted to ask, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
Any other? Sherry?
Thank you, Chief. I think it's really enlightening and clearly you need it, and your officers and your staff shouldn't have to be, like, not having offices. That's also a concern, too, as a working environment for, the members of your department. So that's a big concern. And I think it's really important to note that we will own this building outright. We're paying cash for it, so we would own it outright, if I'm correct, when this is all done, so we get all the equity and we own it.
Gives us that asset, yes.
Yeah.
Any other comments?
I'd like to make a comment.
Yes, Sherilyn.
Thank you, Mayor. And that is, I had the opportunity to I asked the chief for kind of a tour because I've been around long enough that I had seen the building on Litchfield Road when it was where we were meeting as a city council, and I had visions of what it must look like for the police department. And I believe I told Jeff Rogers at the time, we went through it, is that it is amazing that our police officers, in my opinion, it's amazing that they have maintained their dedication to our community, their good spirits in our community, and their belief in our community, because the working conditions were not. I'm just so delighted that it kind of all escalated to this point, because it really, really, really was something we needed to do for our safety.
Well, since I've been on council, anybody else on council want to speak for it? On council since 2005, we've seen the progress that we have not made in the direction of the police department. They were all aware we're underfunded, underserved. And so they waited a long time, and so we finally got the building for the police department. Now we have the 911 center, and this is the last of the really poorly benefits that you've had on the table. So if we get rid of this, I think we're pretty clear. I know there are some other things, I don't know, is a firing range, or just give me kind of what's the next step after this?
Well, there will be some other needs down the road involved with the police building, administration building part. But other than that, everything that we've talked about, and I think that's the final, those things are the final piece.
Okay. So it is well-deserved, and like you, I toured some of them too, and I've watched it happen. And it does kind of, I was sitting here when you were going on and talking about feeling a little guilty, because I sat on those councils that maybe we could have done something earlier and we didn't. So I'm glad that this council came together, and it looks like we're all in the same boat, on the same opinion of this, that it's well-needed. So I think you've kind of got the nodding of the heads here tonight that we're saying, let's buy it.
Thank you.
All right, anything else? Thank you very much. All right. That was a very good presentation, well planned. So, all right, that was our last presentation, and there is accommodation tonight that I'm going to be giving out, so I want to take a moment before I turn it over to you, and that's Brian. I understand that you've been with our city now 20 years. Okay? So I want you to know, on behalf of the city, the Rewards, the Recognition and Events Committee thanks you with a pin for your years of service to the city of Goodyear. You have the copper, the silver, the gold, and now you're back to the bright silver. So, you know, as your mayor, I have been so pleased with you, and I've been around, so I've seen some of your accomplishments through the years. Not as many as there have been other people in the community and the city hall that have seen more than I have. But what can we say? We are so pleased of all that you've accomplished. And I would say this last few years, wouldn't you say, guys, that it even, we ought to double it for the time you put in, because you put a number
Would that
of...
make 40 years?
Yeah, because you put a lot of that hard work in, and it was long hours that you put into it. So it says you will also have your choice of receiving a mahogany certified holder in place of the enclosed paper holder. Okay, I'm confused. Is there another? Oh, I don't know, I don't have it.
For the certificate.
Or certificate, oh, the certificate, I got all confused on it, it doesn't say, all right, so it doesn't say that. So it's your certificate, it's this, right here. It's going to be framed or on mahogany, so you have that choice, okay? So anyways, any comments from council? Before I present him with this pen?
Let's get that going for him, which is nice.
Thank you, Brian. Congratulations.
I did mention, you're not going anywhere, it's 20 years. In the military, they retire at 20 years, so
They do.
you just have to make a promise not to
Thank you.
You're welcome. That was a promise not to retire, by the way. Okay, is there anything from the council that you want to ask? All right, Brian, do you have anything for us?
Just real briefly, thank you, Mayor and Council. A couple of things, we've talked about it before, the USA Today poll. At noon today, the voting officially closed. The good news is that Goodyear Ballpark is rated the best in Arizona out of all of the spring training facilities in Arizona. We are number 2 in the world, which the world is Florida and Arizona. We were barely, looks like we were barely eked out. Tampa Bay Rays Spring Training Facility in Port Charles,
Yes,
Florida
yes.
was number 1. But the official results will be announced on Wednesday, but this is just to let you know. One other thing, too, is I got an email the other day, and it was kind of bizarre, but even in Pittsburgh, there's something called the Pitts NPR News, 90.5 WESA, and they have a roving, a person that travels around the country and looking at spring training facilities. She actually rated us number 1 on a totally different, from a totally different perspective.
Yeah.
So that's out of Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
So we like to hear those things.
You know that barely, the reason I'm cheering on that, they really had a big campaign, and because they would like to get the teams back. So it behooves them to try to get on the number 1 list.
Yes,
So-
it does. And then the last thing, and I sent an email to council today on the CERT class. It was very nice to get a letter from Bob Dansford. He's a Litchfield Park resident who attended our CERT training, and he just really expressed his appreciation, said it was outstanding. We do this jointly with Litchfield Park, but he recognized outstanding staff, and I just wanted to bring up some of the names that he acknowledged. So if we can pass that along, that'd be terrific. To also Fire Chief as well. Tim Newbill, P.J. Miller, Jeanette Van Leeuwen, Tanya Tanner, Robert Marshall, John Farrell, and Ron King. There may be others that he didn't actually cite specifically, but the point is he just felt like the commitment by our staff and the outstanding presentations. It's good to hear those things, so just wanted to pass that along, so thank you.
Great. Thank you. Well, the next meeting will be a work session and a regular meeting on March 31st, starting at 4:30, and then the next one would be April 7th, a work session, April 14th, a work session, regular meeting, and April 15th, a work session. And this meeting, we're going to adjourn, but you know we have a special meeting to go, so I'm going to adjourn this meeting. Meeting adjourned. So I'd like to call to order the special meeting agenda on Monday, March 24th. And everyone is present around the table. We have one business item on this, and so the council upon roll call vote may convene to an executive session as posted on the following. So I would like, ladies and gentlemen, a motion and a second to go in executive session for consultation with the city attorney for legal advice and consultation, and to consider its position and instruct its attorneys regarding the public body's position regarding HB 2826 consolidated elections, and a consultation with the city attorney for legal advice and consultation, and to consider its position and instruct its attorney regarding the public body's position regarding agreements related to the McDowell Road Commercial Corridor improvements.
Madam Mayor, can we break that into 2 votes? Because I think one council member is going to have a conflict on the second.
Okay,
So can we take those individually?
All right, so let's do on the first one, on the consolidated elections. All right. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, I heard a motion from Councilman Stipp and a second from Councilman Loretano. Roll call vote, please.
Aye.
Councilmember Osborne?
Aye.
Councilmember Loretano?
Aye.
Councilmember Campbell?
Aye.
Councilmember Stitt?
Aye.
Councilmember Holman?
Aye.
Mayor Lord?
Aye.
Passes 7-0.
All right, and so we're going to have to recuse one of our council members, and Councilmember Osborne?
Yes, for the public's knowledge, I would like to recuse myself from any discussion to do with that corridor for conflict of interest and ethics issues.
And she needs to go out of the room while we do this. All right, I think you all heard what the second was on. I'll just relate it. It's related to the McDowell Road Commercial Corridor improvements. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Second.
I heard a motion from Councilman Campbell and a second from Vice Mayor Pizzillo. Was that correct? All right. Roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Loretano?
Aye.
Councilmember Campbell?
Aye.
Councilmember Stipp?
Aye.
Councilmember Holman?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pizzano?
Aye.
Mayor Moore?
Aye.
Passes 6-0.
Oh, now we will adjourn to executive session.